Well, hello, folks, and welcome once again to the Joel Saint Show. Great to have you along with us for this episode. Before we jump into it, I want to remind you again to sign up if you haven't done so for the Future of Christendom Conference being held the 11th and 12th of October right here in Lancaster, Pennsylvania. Joe Boot will be our keynote speaker. He is author of The Mission of God, a terrific book which I've read, and he's a man who understands putting feet to his faith, shall we say. There's a lot of, shall we say, conferences you can go to where you can hear about theory. Again, nothing wrong with theory, but theory is useless if you don't put feet to it. Or as my friend Pastor Paul Michael Raymond will say, and he is a man who will also be speaking there at the Future of Christendom Conference. He has said, theology is great, but in the end, it must come out your hands. If your theology doesn't come out of your hands, what good is it? And I believe James would say the same thing. In fact, I had a good discussion this morning with a young man who was taught the book of James, and he did a nice job of telling me how James really challenged him to put feet to his faith and to make sure that there's a connection between your faith and your actions. And that's a really serious thing with James. But Pastor Joe Boot will be our keynote speaker. We also do what we call expositions and 18-minute talks on various topics. One of our speakers will be Chris Hume. He was behind the Amos Miller case in terms of making it very public. As editor of the Lancaster Patriot, the Amos Miller case, you may recall Amos Miller, an Amish man in Lancaster County, got in all kinds of trouble for the crime, if you will, the grave offense of selling food to his neighbors. Interestingly enough, not to get into this too much, this is an aside, but I'll get off this right away. Chris and I actually sat in on one of his trials, and the state of Pennsylvania did all that they could to try to give evidence that his neighbors had been harmed. And they couldn't do it. They couldn't give any evidence at all. There was not a single piece of evidence in that trial where the state of Pennsylvania, with all its resources, having raided his place of business, having taken out much of the food that he's trying to sell to his neighbors, having labeled an awful lot of it as unfit for human consumption, having done all of that and all the research, they couldn't come up with a single person who would testify that they had been harmed by Amos Miller's products. But that didn't stop the state. Of course, they have attacked him anyway. Well, Chris Hume, editor of the Lancaster Patriot, will be one of our speakers. Our theme is Christ is King. And that's, how is that now becoming like controversial, an anti-Semitic statement? Are you kidding me? Christ is King. And as a matter of fact, that was one of the earliest titles that was ever given to him. You'll remember there in Matthew, the wise men. Where is he who is born King of the Jews? So Christ, in fact, is King, and we'll be hearing from multiple speakers who will address the kingship of Christ from various angles. Pastor Matt Truella will address the topic, Christ is King of hirelings. Christ talks about hirelings and pulpits in John chapter 10. He doesn't say pulpits, but he talks about hirelings, shepherds, if you will, who flee when the wolf comes. And, a real shepherd, a real pastor, and I pray by God's grace I would be this. It's one thing to say it, it's another thing to do it. But when the wolf shows up, the real pastor heads toward the wolf. The hireling runs from the wolf. That's from Pastor Matt Truella. Actually, Joe Boot will be doing an exposition talk as well. His talk will be Christ is King of your pronouns. Now, you can see already this is definitely a different conference. And if you haven't signed up yet, you need to do so, because you won't get what we're offering anywhere else that I know of. And we hope to see you there for sure. That is October the 11th and 12th of this year. The Future of Christendom Conference. Go to futureofchristendom.org to sign up. And we'd really like to see you there. Well, let's jump into it right now. Back on the 11th of this month August of 2024, August 11th, 2024, I preached a sermon called Polygamy, Practical Problems. As a result of this sermon, shall we say, a gaggle of what I call polypals arose in opposition. And the polypals, there's about 5 or 6 of them, I suppose, had some things to say. And so what I wanted to do was I wanted to respond to their criticisms and their challenges. I need to thank the polypals. They, certainly they will help drive attendance, drive audience to this particular video channel. Now, just to be sure that you know, the sermon itself, and I'll put a link in the description. The sermon itself is on the Independence Reformed Bible Church YouTube site, but I'm not responding there. I am responding here on my own Joel Saint show. But again, the polypals, they had some things to say, most of which was superfluous and frankly just bad argument. But I mean, I'll demonstrate that. Not all of it is, I don't think, bad argument. Some just misses the point entirely, I think on purpose, quite frankly. But we'll go through the arguments one at a time. There's about a little over maybe 30 challenged to what I said, and I think I've got about 20 or so that I'm going to deal with in this particular episode. I'll deal with others a little bit later. I just didn't want this one to get too long. So let's just jump right into what some of these criticisms were. And here we go. And I'm going to categorize various and sundry of these responses or challenges. Let's start with the ad hom guy. Now, when we say ad hom or ad hominem, that simply means against the man. It has nothing to do with the argument, but it's just against the person who is presenting an argument. If you've done street work, if you've been out in public proclaiming the gospel in public, or if you've been in front of an abortion clinic, which is also public, you will constantly get ad hom arguments. Every once in a while, you'll get somebody who can talk about the actual issue of abortion. Most of the time, it's you guys need to be quiet and you guys need to stop judging, blah, 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 which has, again, nothing to do with the actual topic at hand. This happened to me recently. I was in a city and I had a sign that someone took offense to. It was against feticide or abortion, child sacrifice. Abortion is the nice word. Child sacrifice and feticide, I think, are more accurate terms. In any case, he stopped, rolled down his window, and started yelling at me, "Why don't you guys keep your opinions to yourselves?" Again, that has nothing to do at all with the legitimacy of feticide at all. It has nothing to do with that. However, that didn't stop him. He's attacking us for being there. He's not actually interacting with what we're saying. That's the ad hom argument, if you will, or if it even is an argument. So one guy starts out getting into the actual protests, if you will, or challenges that are on the website there below the sermon in the comment section. This guy starts out, "Wicked people hate instruction and cast my words behind them." Proceeds to ignore God's instructions and cast God's words behind him. Answer that. There's a killer argument. Ad hom. It's useless. And then he goes and does it again. "My guy literally has the Bible staring him in the face and proceeds to ignore what it plainly says." What am I supposed to say? No, I don't. Okay. We can't spend a lot of time with that foolishness. Okay. That's ad hom. Now, here's another one that I've run into from time to time, which I'm calling Bible verse warfare. It's my verse can beat up your verse. Have you ever been in a discussion like this? Social media has made this, I think, has helped to make this perhaps more prominent than ever. Somebody quotes a verse, somebody else quotes another verse, and it's basically my verse can beat up your verse. Instead of working the two together, oftentimes it's just left there. My verse is bigger than your verse. Well, let's look at this. So this challenger, this polygamy pal, he quotes Ezekiel 23, 1 through 4, and then says, God describes himself as a polygynist. Would he describe himself in sinful terms? So what he does is he quotes Ezekiel 23, 1 through 4, which I will now read to you, but I'm going to read a little bit more than that. The word of the Lord, this is Ezekiel 23, verse 1. The word of the Lord came again unto me, saying, Son of man, there were two women, the daughters of one mother, and they committed whoredoms in Egypt. They committed whoredoms in their youth. There were, and this is pretty direct, shall we say, pretty graphic. There were their breasts pressed, and there they bruised the teats of their virginity, and the names of them were Aholah, the elder, and Aholibah, her sister. And they were mine, and they bare sons and daughters. Thus were their names. Samaria is Aholah, capital of the northern 12 tribes, and Jerusalem, Aholibah, capital of Judah and Benjamin, if you will. And Aholah, Samaria, played the harlot when she was mine, and she doted on her lovers, on the Assyrians, her neighbors, which were clothed with blue, captains and rulers, all of them desirable young men, horsemen riding upon horses. Thus she committed her whoredoms with them, and with all them that were the chosen men of Assyria, and with all on whom she doted, with all their idols she defiled herself. Neither left she her whoredoms brought from Egypt, for in her youth they lay with her, and they bruised the breast of her virginity, and poured their whoredoms upon her. Wherefore I have delivered her into the hand of her lovers, into the hand of the Assyrians, upon whom she doted. Okay, let's stop there for a minute. I'm going to read verse 10 in just a second. But notice that the argument is that God presented himself as being a polygamist, having two wives at the same time, Aholah and Aholibah. But listen to the next verse, verse 10. These discovered, these now the Assyrians, her lovers, these discovered her nakedness. They took her sons and her daughters and slew her with the sword, and she became famous among women, for they had executed judgment upon her. So no, God did not have two wives at the same time. Aholah is dead. Now we begin to hear about Aholibah. She was introduced to us first. Now in verse 11, and when her sister, and in the narrative, this is the first we hear of Aholibah in terms of the narrative. Again, she's been introduced. And when her sister Aholibah saw this, she was more corrupt in her inordinate love than she, and in her whoredoms more than her sister. In her whoredoms, she doted upon the Assyrians, her neighbors. That's what Samaria did. Captains and rulers clothed most gorgeously, horsemen riding upon horses, all of them desirable young men. So, she didn't have them at the same time. Now, let's add something to that. Leviticus 18:18. Neither shalt thou take a wife to her sister to vex her, to uncover her nakedness beside the other in her lifetime. You're not allowed, Leviticus 18:18 says, to marry sisters. Even if God did present himself that way, we still are to do what he says we're to do. We don't copy everything that God does. There are certain things that he does that we are not allowed to do. We'll get into that a little bit later, because this issue comes up again. There's a big deal in these polygamy circles. God himself presented himself as a polygamist. No, he does not. And he did not here. Now, let's move on. This is now what I'm calling descriptive versus prescriptive. Genesis 30:18. This person says, quotes Genesis 30:18. And Leah said, God has given me my hire because I have given my maid to my husband, and she called his name Issachar. So it looks like what this person is arguing is because Leah said this, that must mean that God did give her a hire because she did a wonderful thing. She gave her maiden to her husband. Obviously, this is a good thing because that's what she said. But are all of God's gifts good for the receiver? Put aside for a second, we'll get to this in a minute, but put aside for just a moment the fact that God said, or that God will do things like give people various gifts. And there are other people that will say, well, God told me this or God told me that. Have you ever run into that? And how are you going to argue? And so this is just a description. Leah said, God has given my hire because I've given my maid to my husband. She said it. Does that make it good? No. It just means that she said it. Listen to one request that God gave and didn't work out so well. Psalm 106:15, talking about the children of Israel. And he gave them their request, but sent leanness into their soul. And he gave them their request. That's the same word that Leah used in Genesis 30 and verse 18. God hath given me my hire. Same word in Psalm 106:15. And he gave them their request, but sent leanness into their soul. Yeah, so he gave it to them. Didn't mean it was a good thing. In fact, for them, at least in the short term, it was not a good thing. Hopefully they learned a lesson. Also, the fact that someone says that God approves is not in itself, that doesn't mean that that's the case. Give you a quick example. You might recall in 2 Kings in chapter 18, and this is also repeated in the book of Isaiah, the Assyrians come up against the Israelites, or Jews, if you will, Judah, really, and Hezekiah is king at this point. And here is what they say to Hezekiah through intermediaries. Am I now, this is the Assyrian captain talking here, or spokesman, I should say. Am I now come up without the Lord against this place to destroy it? The Lord said to me, go up against this land and destroy it. So, I mean, here's a guy saying the Lord said it. Doesn't mean that he did say it. And in fact, things don't work out too well, if you recall about this, for the Assyrians. They wound up losing and wound up heading back home with their tail tucked solidly between their legs. Same thing happened with Josiah. After all this, when Josiah had prepared the temple, Necho, king of Egypt, came up to fight against Carchemish by Euphrates. And Josiah went out against him. But he sent ambassadors to him, saying, this is Pharaoh Necho to Josiah. The ambassadors went from Pharaoh Necho to Josiah. And this is what they said, what have I to do with thee, thou king of Judah? I come not against thee this day, but against the house wherewith I have war. For God commanded me to make haste, forbear thee from meddling with God, who is with me, that he destroy thee not. Pharaoh Necho is telling us all that God told him to hurry up. Maybe so, maybe no. So we don't know that that was the thing, that actually happened, that God told him to do that. Any more than we know that since Leah gave her maid to her husband, that's actually a good thing, that God approves of that. There's a lot of things that people say that God did, and he didn't do it at all. So that argument also fails rather drastically. Now, let's do this, because I'm having trouble moving this here. Let's do this here. All right, here we go. This next argument is just wrong. Sins of the flesh requiring penalties. Now listen to this argument here, and I want to follow it through. Please follow the argument. I'm going to give it to you first, and then I'm going to respond. Feelings rather than properly handling the Word of God? Gotcha. By the way, the Scripture does a really good job of describing what sins of the flesh are and their penalties. What was the penalty ascribed to Moses for his 3 wives? What was the penalty for Gideon for his multiple wives? What was the penalty for Elkanah and his 2 wives? Where was the penalty for Jesus for describing himself as having 10 virgins he was planning to wed, but only took 5 into his wedding chamber because the other 5 didn't prepare? What is the penalty for Yahweh for taking 2 wives out of Egypt and wedding them both in the wilderness? We've already dealt with that. That's just that last part is just really bad. But let me just address some of the other ones. Does God, and the idea is that if God doesn't give a penalty for something, then it must be approved. Well, God doesn't always lay out exact penalties, especially to the people that perform the wicked act. I'll give you a illustration here. This is from Leviticus 19:29. Do not prostitute thy daughter to cause her to be a whore, lest the land fall to whoredom and the land become full of wickedness. Now that's a general penalty, if you will, but right there in that verse, there's no penalty for the person not for the daughter or the father and mother that prostitute the daughter. Does that mean that God approves of this somehow, because we don't have a penalty there, right? So it must be okay. Let's keep going. Because in Leviticus 21:9, we find out, just a couple chapters later, we find out that God can, if he wants to, ascribe a particular penalty to the offender. Now listen to this. And the daughter of any priest, if she profane herself by playing the whore, she profanes her father, she shall be burnt with fire. So there we do have a penalty. But the statement was, the scripture does a really good job of describing what sins of the flesh are and their penalties. The idea is, apparently, as I understand it, well, we don't have penalties for some of these things these other guys did, so it must be approved by God. What I notice in this question, this is what I notice, is the questioner here, or the person who made the statement, he's got some interesting examples. He's got Gideon, he's got Elkanah, he's got Moses, and Moses definitely does not qualify as being a polygamist. And you can look that up and do some more study on that. I have. John Calvin definitely believes that the Cushite woman was actually his original wife, Zipporah, and he's got some receipts on that. So anyway, but other ones clearly had multiple wives. Elkanah, for example, and others. Well, let's see who he's got. Elkanah, he's got Gideon, he's got Jesus describing himself as 10 virgins he was planning to wed, which that definitely does not say. That they weren't even called brides in Matthew 25 there. They're not even called brides. There's no statement that he's planning to wed them. But anyway, there are others that he brings up that are legit. Gideon, multiple wives. Elkanah with 2 wives. I notice that he did not mention Solomon with his 700 wives and 300 concubines. Are we to conclude that Solomon was never specifically penalized? Nowhere do I know of that Solomon was specifically penalized, a specific penalty for Solomon because he married all those wives. But he was told not to do that. He was told as a king in Deuteronomy, do not multiply wives. He violated Deuteronomy 18:18, but we see no penalty. Now, we do see the fact that his wives turned his heart away. And we do see a penalty for him being idolatrous. But we don't see a penalty specifically for him having all those wives. Now, I hope nobody says, well, he didn't really multiply wives. Okay, if 700 wives isn't multiplying wives, then then we have other problems. Okay, he definitely multiplied wives. I hope the polygamist, anyone from my polygamous pals here, would not deny that he multiplied wives. I hope you wouldn't deny that. I hope not. He clearly did do that. He violated Deuteronomy 18:18, but yet there's no penalty. So no, we don't always have a penalty ascribed to a particular sin of the flesh. So this argument fails again. All right, next problem we have. I'm just call this just not the argument from just not paying attention, if you will. This person says, so you're saying at 21:30 that it's okay for God to sin? Wow, that flies in the face of Scripture. Well, no, that's not what I said. What I said was there are certain things that God does that we can't do. Give you an example. Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Psalm 94:1 says, O Lord God, to whom vengeance belongs, O God, to whom vengeance belongs, shine forth. So what's happening here is God is the one who is allowed to hand out vengeance. We are not. And that's my point there. All right, this next one, special pleading and Bible verse warfare. This next person got the two kind of even together. He's got two logical inconsistencies, if you will, all together. Listen to this. Okay. And a lot of people have gone for this. Joash was 7 years old when he began to reign. This is Joash, a king in Judah. And he reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name also was Zibiah of Beersheba. And Joash did what was right in the sight of the Lord all the days of Jehoiada the priest. And Jehoiada took for him 2 wives, and he begat sons and daughters. Sounds like an approval of polygamy, doesn't it? He got 2 wives. Okay. Well, let's look a little wider at this. Do just a little more study. That, what I just quoted from was, let's see, 2 Chronicles, 24, 1 through 3. Let's listen to 2 Kings 12, 1 through 3. Same exact scenario, but there's different details. In the 7th year of Jehu, Joash began to reign. 40 years reigned he in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Zibiah of Beersheba. And Joash, it's actually spelled a little bit different than King James, Jehoash, but it's the same guy. He did that which was right in the sight of the Lord all his days, wherein Jehoiada the priest instructed him. So far, that's pretty much the same as what we have in Chronicles. But this next detail is a bit different. But the high places were not taken away. The people still sacrificed and burnt incense in the high places. So, we have the chronicler saying, or the writer of Kings saying, he did that which was right in the sight of the Lord. They both say that, the author of Chronicles and the author of Kings. They both say the same thing. He did that which was right in the sight of the Lord. And then, in Kings, we have a statement that he didn't take away the high places. The people still sacrificed and burnt incense in the high places, which they were not to do. So, when Chronicles tells us that he did right in the sight of the Lord and he had a couple of wives, that's description again. He did that was right. He had a couple of wives. Does that mean that his wives were the right thing? No, it doesn't. Any more than the King's passage demonstrates that not taking away the high places made everything right. Because think about the consistency here. If we're going to say that it was right to take 2 wives, then we must say that it was right to not take the high places away. If we're going to be consistent, we can't be arbitrary here. The high places should have been taken away. Hezekiah later on did take them away. Why did this happen this way? God had set his name to be worshipped in Jerusalem. And I'm going to give you just a couple of verses here. Please don't let your eyes glaze over here, but I want to make this point that the high places should have been taken away, even though he said it was right. He did the right thing all the days of Jehoiada the priest. Now, if you're going to say that this is a contradiction, no, there's no contradiction here. I think what is happening is we have a general statement, a statement of generality. We do this all the time. We say, so-and-so was a really good guy, or so-and-so was a really good pastor. There's some things that they failed at. But it doesn't mean if we say the person did the right thing, he was a man who honored Christ, we say that doesn't mean that he didn't ever fail. And that doesn't mean, again, that it was right to take 2 wives, even though Jehoiada gave them, any more than it was right not to take down the high places. Why should he have taken down the high places? Manasseh, this is from 2 Kings 21. Manasseh was 12 years old when he began to reign, and reigned 55 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Hephzibah. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, after the abomination of the heathen, whom the Lord cast out before the children of Israel. For he built up again the high places which Hezekiah his father had destroyed. And he reared up altars for Baal, and made a grove, as did Ahab king of Israel, and worshipped all the hosts of heaven, and served them. And he built altars in the house of the Lord, of which the Lord said, in Jerusalem will I put my name. And another verse from 1 Kings chapter 11 and verse 36. And unto a son I will give one tribe, that David my servant may have a light always before me in Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen me to put my name there. They were to worship in Jerusalem. They weren't to worship in these high places. Also from 2 Kings 21:7. And he set a graven image in the grove that he had made in the house of which the Lord had said to David and Solomon his son, in this house In this house and in Jerusalem, which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, will I put my name forever. From 2 Chronicles 33 and verse 4, and he built altars in the house of the Lord, wherein the Lord had said, in Jerusalem shall my name be forever. So, simple argument here. You can't say that the two wives were a good thing when the same phraseology is used when he clearly failed and did a bad thing with the same phraseology and did not take down the high places. So that argument, once again, fails. All right, another bad argument. Listen to this. Yes, we do what he tells us. He tells us how to righteously handle having more than one woman. Okay, let me stop right there. Where? This person here doesn't tell us where. You know why he doesn't do it? Because God nowhere did that. Tell me where God in the Bible told us how to handle more than one woman at the same time. You know, you would think that this person here would like give us an example of that, but he doesn't because he can't. I don't blame him for not giving an example. There are none. Then he says this, and this is another one, and this is another. I have to appreciate this next part because this is what a lot of people come up with. So this person brings this up, so let's address it. He says this: God does not regulate sin and tell you how to do it better. He prohibits sin. Since he regulated polygyny, it cannot be sin. The regulations are guardrails to keep you from turning it into sin or turning into sin. All right, this sounds, what are we to do with this? Well, does God regulate sin? Well, listen to what we have to say here, because I believe he does put certain guardrails in place because of sin, recognizing the sin that's going to take place. So the idea is God does never regulate sin? Well, Matthew 19:8. He saith unto them, Moses, because of the hardness of your heart, suffered you to put away your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. So here is Christ saying that Moses, because of the hardness of their hearts, he put in a regulation because he knew that their hearts were hard. Is hardness of heart sin? I believe so. So yeah. So there we have a case that's opposite of what my questioner says. God never regulates sin. Well, here he apparently did. Spurgeon gives another example. He says this. He says, now when the Lord gave to the Jews this law concerning the cities of refuge, he's talking primarily about the cities of refuge here. I want you to hear what he has to say. When the Lord gave to the Jews this law concerning the cities of refuge, he took advantage of their deep-rooted love towards the system of the revenge of blood by the nearest relative. God acted wisely in this, as he has done in all things. There are two matters mentioned in Scripture which I do not believe God ever approved, but which, finding they were deep-seated, he did not forbid to the Jews. One was polygamy. The practice of marrying many wives had become so established that, though God abhorred it, yet he permitted it to the Jews because he foresaw that they would inevitably have broken the commandment if he had made an ordinance that they should have but one wife. It was the same with this matter of blood revenge. It was so firmly fixed in the mind of the people that God, instead of refusing to the Jews what they regarded as the privilege of taking vengeance upon their fellows, enacted a law which rendered it almost impossible that a man should be killed unless he were really a murderer, for he appointed 6 cities at convenient distances, so that when one man killed another by accident and so committed homicide, he might at once flee to one of these cities. And though he might have to remain there all his life, yet the avenger of blood could never touch him if he were innocent. He would have a fair trial, but even if he were found innocent, he must stay within the city into which the avenger of blood could not by any possibility come. So, Spurgeon is right on this point. There has to be a trial. You run to a city of refuge and someone wants to kill you, there has to be a trial. Maybe you did not kill them by accident, as you claim when you came to the city. Hey, I killed somebody by accident. It was an accident. We were working together, and a person fell into a pit or something like that, which happens. When I was in the concrete business, that happened in a case, a person was digging a wall for a concrete, or digging a deep ditch for a concrete wall, and the dirt fell in on him and killed him. Anyway, that's an aside. But let's say I go and I say, yeah, it was an accident, right? Well, there has to be a trial. There has to be a trial. The avenger of blood actually has to come into the trial to testify against that person, has to actually come into the city, but he can't touch that person as long as he's in the city. Now, here's the thing. Let's say the person was telling the truth. The person who killed someone else by accident was telling the truth, and he is declared innocent. Yet, if that person were to go outside that city, he could be killed, yes, murdered by the blood avenger, and that blood avenger would not be guilty. So that seems to me, yes, a regulation, if you will, because it's obviously sinful to kill a person who's been declared innocent in a fair trial. You can't do that. That's murder. But according to Spurgeon here, I think he's got a point. Yeah, God did throw some regulations down because he knew how much the whole blood avenger thing was part of the ancient culture, if you will. So that argument also can be answered. I don't think that's a terrible argument, but I believe that it can definitely be answered. And I think Spurgeon here has a good parallel, because clearly to murder someone who'd been declared innocent, that's sinful, and yet it was allowed in this case. There's one reply to this comment. Somebody said a few ad hominem attacks, and then another ad hominem is, I also noticed the flies around you. So I guess that's going to be really hard for me to come back on. Not going to be able to answer that. Oh no. All right. Another then apparent serious question. This person says, and this is again, I think a better response, much better. Love the sermon and passion for defending God's word. I do have one question though. If polygyny is tantamount to adultery against your first wife, then why weren't Jacob or Abraham or David ever accused of adultery by God, considering that God took adultery so seriously and that it was punishable by death? This is a good question. I addressed it partly above, but let me go further. God at one time overlooked certain sins done in ignorance, of which we are now to repent. Is polygamy one of them? As we saw in Spurgeon's illustration above, there were some circumstances in which even murder was regulated and not punished. The slaying of an innocent man who had been judged not guilty of punishment was apparently not considered murder. This appears to be the ignorance that Paul was addressing on Mars Hill, and I believe that polygamy fits into that category as well. I agree with Spurgeon on this point. Acts 17:30, Paul speaking of Mars Hill. Truly, these times of ignorance God overlooked, but now commands all men everywhere to repent. So there were some things that God says he overlooked. Not anymore. Not overlooking this. I believe that polygamy is one of them. And it's not just Spurgeon either. Commenting on Genesis 29, listen to Matthew Henry. He says this, he says, the polygamy of the patriarchs was, in some measure, excusable in them because, though there was a reason against it as ancient as Adam's marriage, yet there was no express command against it. It was in them a sin of ignorance. This is Matthew Henry. A sin of ignorance. Not a sin of adultery, but a sin of ignorance. It was not the product of any sinful lust. And clearly it wasn't in the case of Abraham and in the case of Jacob. It was not the product of any sinful lust. It may have been, and he's talking about the patriarchs here. Talking about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I don't think he's including David here. He doesn't say either way, but that's what it looks like. He said it was not the product of any sinful lust. Definitely not in Abraham's case and in Jacob's case. But for the building up of the church, which was the good that providence brought out of it, but it will by no means justify the like practice now, when God's will is plainly made known that one man and one woman only must be joined together, and he references 1 Corinthians 7:2. I would also reference myself, 1 Corinthians 7:4. Matthew Henry goes on to say, the having of many wives suits well enough with the carnal, sensual spirit of the Mohammedan imposture, which allows it, but we have not so learned Christ. That's Matthew Henry on that. So again, I'm not the only one agreeing with Spurgeon here. Now I realize that this is not going to make cut a lot of ice with the hardcore polygamous crowd. But, think about it a little bit. These guys are really quick to say, Matthew Henry, blah, Spurgeon, blah, whatever. Well, yes, I get it. You on your keyboard know more than these guys, and you're a lot smarter than these guys, and you're a lot more committed. But most of you guys, you're not worthy to be in the same sentence with Spurgeon and Matthew Henry. I'm not either. Not saying I am. But at least I'm not here saying, they didn't know what they were talking about. Because they did. All right, here's a cheap shot argument. So when did Jesus ever explicitly say, not 3, not 4, not 5? I said this in my sermon. The two shall be one flesh. My point was that he did say 2. Do you really think I was quoting Jesus when I said not 3, not 4, not 5? Or were you just looking for a cheap shot? This is another cheap shot ad hom type thing, which I get why you do that. You don't really have a case, so you come up with these things. Okay, this is a think about it criticism. Think about this. This person says jealousy, anger, idolatry, etc. never happens in monogamy-only marriage, and sons never argue, fight, betray each other. Okay, solid argument. Little sarcasm there. That's okay. Sarcasm can be a legitimate thing to use in an argument at times. I happen to think the Apostle Paul used sarcasm more than once, actually. Okay, here's my response. Of course, the idea is you can't say that polygamy contributes to problems in a home because sons of monogamy sons also have challenges. So you can't do that. All right, here's my response. We need to consider the scriptural testimony here. The scriptures do record times of discord between brothers born of monogamy. However, what we also see is discord solely because of polygamous marriages. See Jephthah and Abimelech, for example. So my point is, there are built-in problems between brothers because of polygamy. Yes, there are problems in monogamous marriage, but you have more problems, you have built-in problems in polygamy. Jephthah and Abimelech, for example, and they're not the only ones. Now, Jephthah the Gileadite was a mighty man of valor. This is from Judges 11, verse 1. And he was the son of an harlot, and Gilead begat Jephthah. And Gilead's wife bare him sons, and his wife's sons grew up, and they thrust out Jephthah and said unto him, here's the reason for thrust. He didn't do anything. You know what his crime was? Thou shalt not inherit our father's house, for thou art the son of a strange woman. So, we have a built-in problem. We have a problem between brothers simply because of polygamy here. Gideon had 70 sons of his body begotten, for he had many wives. And his concubine that was in Shechem, she also bare him a son, whose name she called Abimelech. And Abimelech, the son of Jerubbaal, meaning Gideon there, went to Shechem unto his mother's brethren. This is Abimelech now, Gideon's son, but he's got a different mom here. Went unto his mother's brethren and communed with them and with all the family of the house of his mother's father, saying, Speak, I pray you, in the ears of all the men of Shechem, whether is better for you, either that all the sons of Jerubbaal, Gideon, which are 70 persons, reign over you, or that one reign over you. Remember also that I am your bone and your flesh. And his mother's brethren spake of him in the ears of all the men of Shechem all these words, and their hearts inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, He is our brother. So they identified with him based on the fact that he was based on his family, if you will. His mother's brethren. So his mother's brothers spake of him in the ears of all the men of Shechem all these words, And their hearts inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, he is our brother. So we have this polygamy problem going on right here in the middle of everything. And you may say, well, they didn't have a problem. It was the mother's brothers. Apparently this prostitute woman had others. Well, she had other fathers, perhaps they're all born from the same mother, and they're being inclined to be loyal to their brother, even though they had different fathers. Interesting to me that their inclination was to do evil. And if you follow the career of Abimelech, this man killed an awful lot of people by the time he was done. So he was able to get his brothers killed, if you keep reading the passage, based on the fact that they had and there was competition here too, of course. It's not the only time this happened, but he was able to get people to believe him based on his maternal characteristics, or his maternal heritage here. And I want to say, now this is me here, yes, there are problems recorded in the scriptures between brothers born of monogamy, but as mentioned, those problems are a matter of specific circumstances, not about parentage, as we see with Jephthah, Abimelech, and Ishmael. Ishmael was, of course, there were different mothers there for Ishmael and Isaac. And, interestingly enough about that, they, I think, tried to make it work and tried to make it get along, help each other to get along. I'm talking about Sarah and Hagar. But you remember what kind of busted it up? Sarah sees Hagar mocking her son Isaac. She goes to Abraham and says, get him out. Now, let me ask you, everyone watching this right now, let me ask you, do you think that might happen in polygamous marriages? You think that kind of thing might happen? There might be competition between the kids just because of who their mother is? I think it can. I was talking about Pastor Kaiser earlier. Or maybe not in this podcast I was talking about him. Pastor Philip Kaiser is a tremendous scholar in Nebraska. He's a missionary's kid, grew up in Africa, Ethiopia, I believe. And we got talking about polygamy. And he's seen an awful lot of it. We were talking about the problems that Jacob had. You want to see problems in polygamy? Jacob absolutely has them. I dealt with that in my next sermon. And Pastor Kaiser said this to me. He said, he said, I grew up in Africa. I saw polygamy in action. He said it was nothing but scheming and competition and bitterness. And I thought to myself, kind of like what the Bible actually says, maybe, if you're paying attention. Anyway, next, criticism. I'm going to call this the what are you talking about criticism. And man, this podcast is getting long. This is not a serious criticism. It's like, what's this person talking about? He says, God said, be holy as I am holy. Paul said, imitate me as I imitate Christ. Did you use don't do as he does, but as he says during the what would Jesus do phase? I don't know what he's talking about there. There was a WWJD phase. I never liked it. I thought it was wrong the whole time. We basically get that from this I hope is helpful. We basically get that from a fiction book. The fiction book by Charles Sheldon was in his steps, and the idea was, what would it look like if we would just ask ourselves, what would Jesus do? I never liked that. I'll tell you what Jesus would not do. He would not get married. He never did get married. No, it's not what Jesus would do. It's what would Jesus have us do? And I believe that then, and I believe that now. Okay, I have a lot more to go here. This is getting so long. I'm just going to do this next one here. One more. And there's many more, but again, this is long, and I hope I got this in the order. I've noticed it seems like sometimes YouTube will take the comments and change the order. I don't know how or why they do that or how that happens. I'm trying to take these in the order that they show up on the website or the YouTube site. This person, I'm going to call this an apparent serious criticism or question. This person says, I checked your church website. Wow, you guys are Reformed, Theonomic, Postmillennial. That's wonderful. I'm a Reformed Baptist, Theonomic leaning and Postmillennial leaning. I'm still kind of new to theonomy and postmillennialism. I also understand that the Bible very clearly treats polygamy as marriage, not adultery or sexual immorality. It's throughout the Bible. I can take you to tons of passages. I think God is testing you, talking about me, to see if you fear him more than you fear the disapproval of man and woman. I pray that you'll be faithful to Christ even in this secondary matter. Let God be true, though every man be a liar. I appreciate the seriousness with which this person brings this forward. But he says, even in this secondary matter, well, for my poly pals, it's not a secondary matter. I mean, they really care what a pastor, me, in some corner of Pennsylvania says about this. I mean, they're uptight. It's like kicking a hornet's nest. Who cares? I mean, are they confident that they're right? If they have the confidence that they are correct, why do they care what this pastor says? But they do care a lot, and it doesn't seem to be a secondary matter to them. But here's what I have to say about this. I say, again, this has been addressed above, but let's ask another question. Are all marriages qualified under the statement of Christ in Matthew 19:6? Wherefore they are no more twain, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let not man put asunder. Do all marriages qualify under this directive? Apparently not. See, for example, Ezra 10, where the wives and their children were put away. The wives and their children were put away. So at least in this case, the polygamy was definitely treated as some kind of sexual immorality. So while it's perhaps true that all polygamy, done in ignorance, as we mentioned before, is not treated as sexual immorality, this is. So apparently there are some marriages that Christ or God approves of and some that he does not approve of. And is he saying, for example, in Ezra 10, that this never really was a legitimate marriage? So put them away. You were never legitimately married. This is immorality, sexual immorality, the whole time. There are some things that occur in the Bible that we cannot condone today. Abraham married his half-sister. That certainly does not give us permission to do the same. Polygamists like to say that God never condemns polygamy. Well, he does in the cases of kings and church leadership in 1 Timothy 3, Titus 1, and of course Deuteronomy 18:18. He does in some cases. I will deal with those passages in another episode. In fact, my sermon tomorrow, I'm recording this on a Saturday, will address the Timothy and Titus passages. So he definitely does condemn it, at least in certain cases. Are those cases normative? I believe they are in this era where God is no longer overlooking polygamy. Now, I'm going to wrap it up right there. This has gone on for longer than I thought it would. Again, I've got a lot more to say, but let's just call it a day right here. Again, I'm talking to three different kinds of people here. Some driven by lust. They want multiple wives. Multiple partners. We have an example in the Bible. Samson sounds like he qualifies as one of those guys. Samson never could get past his lust. It seems like until his eyes got put out. That solved his lust problem, for sure. He couldn't see anything. Or maybe it mostly solved it. Who knows? Who knows what his thought life was? Those driven by lust. But again, I don't think that's everybody watching this video. This YouTube video. I think there's some people that are motivated by being, let's say, in the front edge, on the cutting edge of some new thing. Again, I've mentioned this to folks before, that I am an abolitionist. I believe in abolitionism very, very much. I do not believe in making specific laws to kill some babies and not others. But being around the abolitionist movement for as long as I have, I've seen some people that don't really care about the babies. They don't care about feticide. They don't care about child sacrifice. But they saw a movement where they could be a somebody in it. They could be in the front of it. They could be somebody that other people look to. They can be a somebody. I believe that's a possibility. And that's actually what my friend Pastor Phil Kaiser, who I just mentioned, brought up to me. And then there's also other people that are on the fence. Those are the people that I'm really talking to the most. Again, there's some people they're just not listening. They're just not paying attention. That's not unusual. God's prophets had that problem again and again. He clearly stated what was going to happen to them. I think the most frustrating job in the world would have been Jeremiah. Jeremiah's job should have been so easy. I mean, think about Isaiah, Jeremiah, and Ezekiel here for a second. Isaiah basically is saying what's going to happen, you idolatrous people. This is what's going to happen. Jeremiah is basically saying this is happening. While Jeremiah ministers, the people get carried off. In Ezekiel, they're already carried off. And he still has to minister to them anyway. I think Ezekiel didn't like his job very much. He talked about heaviness of spirit. I think he had a difficult job that he didn't really enjoy all that much. After all, God took away his wife, called the desire of his eyes. Not his wives, his wife. But anyway, took away his wife. But Jeremiah should have had an easier time of it. All he really had to do was say, listen, God took away, look what happened to the northern 10 tribes. They were idolatrous. They worshipped idols. They didn't obey God and his word and his law. And God did that to them. He carried them away. Same thing's going to happen to us, Judahites, Jews. Stop what you're doing. Stop your idolatry. You're doing just what they did. Should have been so easy. They should have said, oh, yeah, look what happened to the Israelites. Yeah, we don't want that to happen. We'll turn around. We'll stop our idolatry. They won't. They didn't, despite what Jeremiah had to say. There are people that will not listen to what I have to say at all. It happens. But I do want to talk to the people who have ears to hear. And that's what I've attempted to do today. Some of my poly pals will just come at me again, and others as well. But others will listen, and they will observe. And so I will go on with this. I will try to deal with every one of the of my haters, if you will. I don't. They're not all haters, actually. Some are, but not all of them. But I'll deal with the other arguments that my poly pals bring up. And we'll get at this again. If you've made it this far, congratulations. This is not the most pleasant topic in the world. But if you're really thinking about this, and you think, oh, maybe this is something, I urge you to read the scriptures. And I urge you to especially see that the polygamists can make no positive case for polygamy from the narrative. They say it's not prohibited. It's never promoted by statute ever. We'll deal with that more going forward. But there's another thing that my friend Pastor Phil Kaiser pointed out that maybe you've seen this already. In the narratives, whenever we see two wives, multiple wives, we see problems in the narrative. Now, I'm not talking about for example, we don't have a narrative. We don't have what happened with, let's say, Joash's children. We have the statement that he married Jehoiada, got him two wives, but we don't have narrative. But we do have narrative with Abraham. We do have narrative with David. We do have narrative with Jacob. And Jacob especially. Jacob is the one where there's the most narrative. And boy, it looks like there are just problems on top of problems. And keep this in mind, if you're considering this, that they were never, especially Jacob and we'll talk more about this, but Jacob and Abraham, they were one-woman men. They were not, think about this, they were not interested in polygamy. Now, we have all kinds of people saying, hey, yeah, polygamy is the way to go. Tell you who never said that? Abraham never said that, and Jacob never said that. Clearly, they were one-woman men. Abraham, in his case, it was Hagar came and said, well, hey, since I can't have a baby, here's my handmaid. That definitely was not Abraham's idea. It was Hagar's idea. Same way with Jacob. Jacob just wanted Rachel. He had eyes only for Rachel. That is throughout the narrative. But it was Laban's idea to throw other women at him. And even Rachel herself, when she couldn't have a child, she encourages him, and he does, to go into her handmaid. Abraham, Jacob. These are names that come up consistently. They were one-woman men. Anyway, good for you if you stuck with me so far. This went way longer than I wanted, but thank you for coming along. Be blessed. And thank you again. And don't forget to sign up for that Future of Christendom Conference, futureofchristendom.org. Christ is King. He's King whether we recognize it or not. We don't make him King. We only recognize him as King. Or we reject him as King. We're either a willing subject of his or an active rebel. But the fact that there's plenty of active rebels in no way negates the fact that he's King. All right. Thank you again. We're done with this one. And I trust that this was helpful to you.